day when his dad decided that rather than support the family, he would leave the family to pursue a new career in misadventure and alcoholism. And so he did. He upped and left the family when my grandpa was about 10. A couple years later, well, so at that point, his mom became the head of the household. So she would take in laundry, she took in boarders, and they could stay there. Well, a couple years later, when my grandpa was 12, she developed a deep resonant cough. It was diagnosed, I think they called it something like pleurisy. We know it as tuberculosis. And that would take her life when he was 12 years old. That meant that Harry couldn't stay in school anymore. He left school and he took a job in the local coal mine. And if the stories around that time are true that have been passed down to me, and can we get that slide up, please? Thank you. If the stories passed down to me are true, when those mine shafts would fill up with cold water up to his chest, there wouldn't be a day off. You would just continue to work in those conditions. Grandpa needed to do that so he could support himself and his 2 younger brothers. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was 12 years old, I wasn't working in coal mines. I was coming home from school and I would park myself in front of the television set with anything Hostess might have created to snack on while you're watching consecutive episodes of like the Partridge Family, Gilligan's Island, that kind of thing. What would happen over time is those snacks would wear out and I would have to go back into the kitchen to get more snacks for myself. Along the way, we had this china cabinet where all the sacred objects of our family were. And in that china cabinet was the coal lantern my grandpa would use to illuminate his way in those coal mines. And I can remember standing in front of that china cabinet, looking at that coal lantern and thinking, what was it like to be 12 years old, to be him, to be supporting his brothers, to be down in those mine shafts? What was it like to be that guy at 12 years old? And before long, I would remember my purpose of getting up off the couch and leaving my television, which is to go get more snacks. And I'd shake that off and I'd go pick up my snacks and go back to my consecutive viewing. I'm not 12 anymore, but I have raised 3 children who've passed that threshold of 12. So my questions now are a little different than they were then. My questions now would be, what was it like for young Harry when that guy who's supposed to play catch with you up and left, that guy who's supposed to bring home those paychecks, what was that like for him? And when that love of his life, I mean, is there any deeper or more profound love than a 12-year-old's love for his mother? What was it like for Harry when the nights he inhabited were darker than the coal shafts he inhabited by the day? And who rocked little Harry when he wept? And when you think of a life like this and contemplate it and take it in, it's not hard to resonate with that quote from Helen Keller when she said, all the world is full of suffering. All the world is full of suffering. And if we were in a Baptist church together, so many of you would be saying amen, because you've logged enough miles in your life to see the truth of that statement. All the world is full of suffering. But what I want to say to you today is that story didn't end right there. Because a few years later, that guy that you see in that slide, he would meet a cute Polish girl who had a knack for cooking. And he romanced her. And she married him. And together, they raised up 2 boys without benefit of a role model, with fidelity and with affection. That guy that you saw in that slide raised 2 boys. But here's the kicker. Every story about my grandpa converges on the same point. Harry had this laugh that would somehow start at the base of his belly and it'd rumble up through his chest. And by the time he would let it out of his mouth, it could rattle the silverware on your table. I've heard that same resonant laugh barrel through my dad's chest and my children's chests too. That guy that you saw, that story that you heard, that guy laughed. Harry laughed. So that brings me back to Helen Keller's quote. It starts off with, all the world is full of suffering, but there's a second part to that quote. She goes on to say, and all the world is full of overcoming suffering. All the world is full of overcoming suffering. Guillaume Apollinaire, that great philosopher poet, put it like this: come to the edge, life said, come to the edge. But we are afraid, we responded. Come to the edge, life demanded. So we came to the edge. Life pushed us and we flew. Life pushed us and we flew. Tonight, I want to just have a brief conversation and reflection on the experience of being pushed and the experience of flying. I want to talk about resilience. Now, for those of you that know what I do for a living, I'm a counselor who did my PhD work at SLU. And so I studied counseling psychology at St. Louis University. And so some of you might be thinking, well, why are you the one talking about this topic? And if you're asking yourself that question, then maybe you kind of know what has been true of my profession for many decades until recently. If you know of anyone who's conducted psychological research like Mary on this call and like me, what you'll know is that when people come forward for psych studies, frequently they're at the darkest point in their lives. They're being recruited and they are in a time in their life where things are kind of broken. And so when you study those populations, guess what you discover? You begin to accumulate more and more research and big lexicons with vocabulary that describe what's broken, with less to say about how to fix it. Now, fortunately, in the last couple of decades, positive psychology has come along to turn that around. But when I was in grad school, I was really happy to bump into this thing called resilience research and resilience researchers. When I was in grad school, I discovered that resilience researchers are like structural engineers that go into earthquake zones, not to study those buildings that have fallen, but to study those structures that stayed strong through the earthquake, so that the structural engineers can study what are the elements in that building that allowed for that resilience, allowed for that building to stay strong when all the other buildings fell. And so I bumped into these studies, like all of these people are in great marriages and careers, but when they were children, they had the most horrific kind of abuse you could imagine, physical, sexual, and the case studies were hard to get through, they were so bad. But how is it these people ended up in lifelong monogamous relationships that were satisfying, careers that were satisfying? Back in the day, we didn't have a way to think through that to see what would happen, but these resilience researchers studied it. They studied families who had these kinds of diagnoses in the family that nobody wants, but somehow people were meeting their developmental goals. Or they'd study people in the workplace, downsized, out of jobs multiple times, changed careers many times, but somehow landed on their feet and managed to find career fulfillment. Resilience research. And that's kind of what saved me in grad school and propelled me to do some resilience research of my own for my dissertation. And since then, I've tried to keep up with that literature. So tonight, as we are hopefully going to get a second breath here in the middle passageway of our journey, my hope is to share with you some of what I've gleaned out of that research and give you a chance maybe to look at some of the research you've done on resilience and hopefully help you to locate some resilience resources within yourself. Incidentally, if you do find your way to my resilience toolkit, you'll discover that some pretty good resilience research has indicated that if you can locate those resilient stories from your own family, where people fell down and they got back up again, and tell those stories in the context of your family, besides lifting the family self-esteem, it will enhance your resilience. Lisa, could we see that slide that comes next? I want to introduce an image that would be kind of a frame to put around the comments I'm going to make tonight. If you see this, maybe some of you who have a green thumb, I don't. If plants could call DFS, I think I'd be in jail by now. But for those of you that do grow plants indoors, that's an African violet, and they're not easy to grow. I want to start off my comments by telling you a story about African violets. This story comes to me by a colleague of mine, Bill O'Hanlon, who lived with and worked for the great Milton Erickson, who in my profession was thought of as something of a guru when it comes to therapy. He could do stuff in like one session that would take many of us like 10 sessions to do. So the way that Bill O'Hanlon tells the story was that there was a man in Milton Erickson's town, a therapist, who was getting nowhere with the woman who was depressed. And so he calls Milton Erickson, or he writes him and asks, will you consult on a case for me? And Milton Erickson said, yes, provided that I can interview that woman in her home. And so, of course, the therapist, if he could get the great Milton Erickson on board, of course. So he sets it up. Milton Erickson comes to the woman's home accompanied by the therapist. They make their introductions, and he asks her for a tour of the house. And she begins giving him the tour. And Milton Erickson notices that the house itself is speaking a message of depression. You know, it's dark, there's a little bit of hoarding going on, it's dusty, and it hasn't been cleaned in a while, until he gets to the back porch, the sunroom off the back porch. What he finds there are African violets. Big pots of African violets, small ones, medium-sized ones, little starts of brand new African violets, different subspecies and colors of African violets. Well, Milton Erickson, when he sees this, turns to the woman and he says to her, I'll bet you when people in your church, and he mentions people in her church because along the way she let him know that her membership in her local church was important to her. He said, I bet you when you give these African violets away to people in your church, they're really grateful for them and are glad to get them. And the woman looks at him and says, give these away. These are my African violets. I don't give these away. And with that, Milton Erickson says to her, oh, so I thought you said you were Christian. And the interview continued. Years later, Milton Erickson was in his study, opening his mail, and he cuts open the mail and he pulls out a newspaper clipping. And the newspaper clipping, the byline on it reads, African Violet Queen dies. He reads down into the obituary to find out that this woman that he had the interview with had become something of a beloved character in her small town for giving away her African violets to people who were in need, people who were stressed. At the end of the interview, the therapist turns to Milton Erickson and says, what was all that stuff about African violets? And I thought you were Christian. And Milton Erickson turned to the therapist and he said, I became aware some point in that interview that I could spend all my time focused on this woman's depression like every other therapist that's ever worked for her. Or I could help her focus on her African violets and grow those African violets. And I would much rather help her focus on her African violets. Lisa, could we go back to the screen where I can see everybody? Have a look around like Gary said earlier. You're likely to see a lot of African violets looking back at you. I'd like to ask you to conduct some research of your own, to look inside, to locate the African violets inside. And there may be one or two of you who might be thinking, oh, Tom, you don't know me. When I look inside, what I find is manure. To which I would say, African violets grow pretty well in manure. So let's have a look. What I want to ask you to do is to conduct something of your own resilience research. And I want to do it in a very specific way. Could I ask you all to close your eyes? I promise not to hypnotize you, but I'd like to lead you through an exercise. Would that be all right? Nod yes, if it's okay. Nobody's saying no, but you wouldn't say no, would you? Okay, so if you close your eyes, I'd like you to allow the face of someone in your life to pop up that really exemplifies resilience for you. It might be someone who, it might be somebody who's alive, but it could be somebody who's passed on, like a grandma, a grandpa, a mom, a dad, an uncle, an aunt. It could be a colleague, could be a spouse. And it could be that quality about them that's so darn resilient could be something like they had a fall on the floor, laughter, sense of humor. Or maybe they didn't generate the humor, but they were looking for a laugh around every corner. Or maybe your person is so creative, when they open up the refrigerator, they don't see leftovers. they would see gourmet meals. Or maybe it was someone who was so patient that they would take you fishing, and even though you just scared fish away for miles, they would continue to take you back. For me, I'm seeing the face of my grandma, where you just couldn't piss that woman off. She was unflappable. Whose face are you seeing right now? And what I'd like you to do is, once you locate that face, I want you to see them in action as if you're looking at a movie, a clip of a movie, watching them doing that resilient thing. Just a little snippet out of an experience where you're seeing them in action. And what I'm going to invite you to do before the movie ends is I'd like to see each of you smile, and I'll tell you why in just a second. So many of you are already beat me to the punch, but for those of you, even if you have to act like you've got a pencil in your mouth to smile before it's over with, do that. Just see them doing that resilient thing. And before all's said and done, I'd like you to see if you could name, what is that quality, if you had to put it in a word, what's the quality or characteristic? If you had to name it in a word, what is it? Okay, when you're ready to open your eyes, I'm looking around and seeing. Incidentally, the reason for the smiling when you are meditating like that is that I had a neurologist tell me that you get a neurotransmitter hit to a pleasure center in your brain. And so it's free, why wouldn't you? I don't think enough of our statues have saints that smile. You know they did. So what I'd like you to do here in just a second, you're going to be placed into a small group with a couple other people. And it's going to happen randomly. You'll just see it happen on your screen, and poof, there you'll be with 3 people. Or 1 or 2 people, I'm sorry. That's what will happen for you. When that does happen, I don't want you just to say the word that's resilient about your person. I want you to identify who your person is and to tell them the story of that person. I'm going to give you 5 minutes plus. Probably what I'll do is I'll join some of your groups, and I'll just kind of see where you are in 5 minutes. And if it looks like you're done, then you'll see something on your screen that says small group ends in 1 minute, and then poof, we'll be back into the large group again. Such a tremendous sense of power. And it's all mine. So here in just a second, what you'll do in your small group is you'll tell the story of the person that you got in touch with, and let the person in on the movie that you saw. And then at the end of it, you'll see we'll give you the warning that a minute's, we'll come back. Any questions about what we're doing? You type it into your messages if you do have a question. Lisa. All right, here comes the small group part. Go. Let's do it. All right. I want to ask, would anybody on this call be willing to share a story they either heard or a story that they told? Surely one of these talkative people could tell us a story they either heard or a story that they told.
Down.
Is somebody going to unmute themselves and talk?
I will go ahead and share.
I will go.
Linda's doing.
Oh, I will
Go ahead, Linda.
All right. So the person I had in mind grew up with incredible adversity, grew up with 2 alcoholic parents and a father who committed suicide when she was young, and left early from the home, and took a long time to come around to finding her career as a nurse, got married late in life. And through all of that, just everything was stacked against her, but she kept coming. She kept reaching towards the next thing and trying to really improving her life, and is extraordinary still to this day in her outlook on life and in her independence. And I think what strikes me as her generosity of spirit. She is generous in her forgiveness and in her understanding and her care for others and in her laughter. And so she inspires me.
Thanks, Linda.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else want to say what they had in mind, what they were either saying to someone else or they heard from somebody that touched them?
Can't hear.
He was in the middle of a wonderful story, and the punchline, the Zoom ended, and he didn't get the punchline. And he's kind of the introvert, and I'm the extrovert, and he doesn't want to tell the story, but I'm going to make him tell the story.
No, I was talking about my mother, who, God love her, lived through the Depression, and she never, and lived very poor, but whenever she talked about life to us, her kids, we have 7 kids in our family and no money. She grew up with 5 brothers and sisters, no money. They really, she always had the positive outlook on life. But the funny story was when my older brother and I, when we were about 7 or 8 years old, got into a fight with some kid up the street and beat the hell out of him. And you know, as much as the 7-year-old can, went back home, and the mother of that kid called the police. So the police came to our house, and there's an older cop and a rookie cop, and my mom's just giving them hell. She's telling those cops, "What's wrong with you guys? You got nothing better to do than that." And my brother and I are hiding behind the curtain, and the cops are finally embarrassed enough that they just go away, and we're stupid enough to say, "Hey, way to go, Mom," you know, and she beat the hell out of so, so I learned my lesson. She would stand up for family all day long, but don't push too many buttons.
Nice.
Yeah, so she had a lot of moving parts there. Besides being positive, she could also beat the hell out of somebody.
No, she could. That was the style back then.
And she was an awesome mother-in-law. I loved her.
I don't know that I've ever found it in the research, but I can't imagine why it wouldn't be good to be able to defend yourself, you know? Hey, so what I'd like to ask you to just briefly do, and my wife tells me that this is possibly done. Vince asked me, how did you learn, how do you do all this Zoom stuff? And I said, you marry Lisa or you have Julie Shoei help you. Those are the 2 things you do. Will there be a message on their screen here, honey? You're going to see a message on your screen. If you will follow it, what it will invite you to do is to come up with the single word that kind of sums up what you find resilient about your person. And if you could just type that word or very short phrase, actually just one word, just type in that one word. You see the text Lisa M to 37607.
Oh,
I see optimistic. As you type the words in, they'll pop up.
Where do you type?
On your phone, I think. Is you're texting Lisa? Is that what you're doing, Lisa?
Phone here.
Yeah, you're texting Lisa with this.
Oh, I see.
Text Lisa M to 37607
Is that making sense to you?
and then text your message. If it's easier for you to text into the text box, I can add it.
We're seeing 2 responses. We're going to have just about 30 seconds to throw these up here.
Can you pull up Lisa AM?
Patience,
Pull up what?
perseverance, grit,
You need to go to Zoom
laughter,
or what?
optimistic,
Go to your
compassion. It's interesting. Love.
Messages?
Yeah.
Who do I want to send it to?
Do a
You?
message.
It's okay if they
message. There.
half full.
To LISAM.
LISAN?
AM. Oh,
LISAN?
well, I'm not really sure how to do this.
AM.
Lisa, are you hearing people ask?
Joan, if you want to let me know what you want to add, I can add it for you.
And I'm
Just-
typing in the words from the chat.
I was going
Perfect.
to add courage. I mean, yeah.
And I do
I
it
can
in
text that in.
I want to add hope.
Just about 30 more seconds.
Yeah.
I would add vision.
Vision.
Yeah.
What was
I
that?
can't
And
forget.
Oh.
passion.
Do you have a word?
Passion.
Faith.
Faith.
Betsy.
Bounce.
I would add brave.
Grit.
Add humor. Humor. Oh, that's it.
Okay. Any other words you want to put in there?
It's there.
There's yours.
Betsy.
There it is.
So have a look at all these.
Trusting.
Trusting. All right. So you're seeing years of resilience research that's being conducted by the people in this room. Okay. So Lisa, could we have a look at those just for another second? And then I'll want to make some comments about this. So Lisa, do we have them mute now? Okay.
Have the people mute. Do what?
I want to have people mute now. So Julie, could we mute everybody so I can make some comments about this?
I got it.
So I want to round up. Why am I echoing?
I don't know.
Tom, I think you're muted now, and then Lisa is unmuted.
Okay.
So I think if Lisa mutes and then you stay unmuted.
So I'm unmuted.
Now you're muted, Tom.
Okay. Now I'm unmuted. You can hear me okay? All right. You know, people of a certain age, Megan, you know how it works.
We did this all last semester in OT school, so I'm very good at Zoom now.
Well, God love you. Hey, so, yeah, one last look at that, and now you're back to the screen to seeing everybody. So I want to kind of like tell you what just happened. I kind of performed a Jedi counselor mind trick on y'all. And let me tell you how I did it. If you look at those words and the words that you found yourself saying and the words that you listened. So out of all the research in developmental psychology, probably the most solid that's been replicated over and over and over again would be attachment theory studies. What attachment theorists and researchers have noticed is that when you're feeding a baby milk, it's taking in so much more than its mother's milk or its caregiver's formula. That baby's actually taking the person of the caregiver and swallowing that person inside. From a psychoanalytic perspective, we call that introjection. They're taking that person inside their own psychic structure and they're forming a personality with those building blocks. That's where we begin to talk about things like with a good enough caregiver, a child is securely attached. So when they go to the daycare school and they say, you want to play to a little group? And that group says, nah, not so much. They go to the next group and say, you want to play? And they say, no, not so much. And they keep going until somebody wants to play. That good enough caregiving becomes a secure base on the inside. Well, come to find out, that doesn't just stop with infancy or toddlerhood or preschool or primary school. It goes through the course of the whole lifespan. Let me put it like this. Jesus, the psychologist, in John chapter 15, in that first 15 verses, maybe 3 or 4 different times, he uses language like this, depending on your translation. Abide in me, or make your home in me, or remain in me. Says it like 3 or 4 times over and over again. Because Jesus, the psychologist, knew that we tend to become what we love. We tend to become what we contemplate. Do you see what I'm getting at here? When you were describing that person and the quality about them, you were saying as much about yourself as you were saying about them. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. I was in a chat room with Vince. Vince says, he tells me about a person who's persistent. Well, guess what Vince did for a living? Vince was a therapist. Guess what he did? He was persistent. And he said the person has a way for making others feel better. So there's Vince talking about this other person, but revealing as much about himself as he is this other person. We tend to become what we love. I'm listening to Linda Dolmeyer talk to me, and she's talking about her friend Evie that many of you know. Check out what Linda says about her. You guys know Linda? She says, that woman gets it done. Now, you know Linda. She was saying as much about herself as she was saying about her resilient person. She has a generous spirit, Linda said. If you can see Linda's square here, come on now. She's like telling on herself. And she says she can be tough too. And just ask any one of Linda's kids. That's right. And it can be tough, but see, we tend to become what we love. And you might be saying, Tom, but here's the thing, the person I was talking about with their compassion or their love or their vision or their humor. I think I heard Gary say vision. Come on now. You tend to become what you love. You might say, yeah, but I just have a little bit of this. That person had this much. To which I want to say, all it takes is a mustard seed's worth, and you can grow it. So one of the conclusions that draws from this is it's a great reflection on the Eucharist. We tend to take people inside and they become part of us. Another point to take out of this is we can claim that thing we said about that person as our own and consciously try to grow it and make it more and more a part of ourselves. A third thing, when you're in the middle of something very, very difficult, make sure you're very clear about the audience you are internally choosing to watch you. If you choose an audience that is not helpful to you, that's not going to help you be resilient, but you pick this person and picture them in your mind's eye and see if you don't find yourself acting like them. See if you don't find yourself behaving like them in the real world. So I want to thank you for sharing with me your African violets and invite you to claim those. If you still have some stamina left, I'm thinking of sharing with you 1 or 2 resilience insights I've discovered in my own research. If you are still okay with me talking and continuing, shake your head yes. If no, I will just pout and have bad self-esteem. Okay, I see that you're nodding, so I'm going to continue. And I'm trusting you that when your bladder requires you to go, please don't repress that urge. Go take care of it. Hopefully away from the screen though, because what I've discovered as a therapist, sometimes you will be meeting with people in very strange places in telemedicine in their house, including their restrooms. Can you believe it? It happens. All right. So what I want to do to get to my first piece of research that you find in literally every study you come across on resilience, I want to get to it by means of a story, and there'll be a slide that goes with that story now, if you don't mind. Yeah, thank you. So this story, I have to stretch back to the beginning of my marriage before we had children. Any of you remember that? Like when, before the kids, when there were seemed to be, there was always somebody with a violin playing in the background. There were bunnies and butterflies, and life was lovely. Well, I was a late bloomer by the time I married Lisa, so I didn't want to wait around, and neither did Lisa to have kids. We wanted to get to that project pretty quickly. So we thought, while we still don't have kids, let's go on that kind of vacation you can take when you don't have children, you can't take when you do have children. So we called up to the Boundary Waters and found an outfitter who got us our canoes and got us our food and our camping equipment, which we didn't really own at the time. And what's going on, honey? Yeah, the slide's not sharing. Picture, if you will, a lake, a series of lakes between Minnesota and Canada, wilderness canoeing. That's what the slide was going to represent. Now that you're seeing it in your mind's eye. So, oh, there it is. So we get to, but without the script on it, maybe. So we get to the Boundary Waters, and our outfitter takes us to the put-in place and has all our gear. And he says, okay, at the end of the week, we need you back here at this place at such and such a time. Otherwise, you'll have to spend the rest of your days living in the woods like Ted Kaczynski. So we launched ourselves, and we had the notion that it'd be fun to have our very own island. So we had to go mile after mile until we found our own island and had our campsite, had a lovely vacation with many challenges, and the vacation came to an end. And so we packed all our gear, we got in our canoes, but we see that we have some leftover campfire coffee. So my wife and I, we sit down to a cup of coffee and read our novels, taking the last sip of the coffee and the last sip of the vacation. And pretty soon we start noticing that the sky above is kind of a milky white color, and it begins to change to like a blue-black and then a green. And we're like, crap, we can't wait this out. We got to get back at such and such a time. We've just got to get out into this. So we got our stuff into our canoe and we launched ourselves at about the time the heavens launched the rain onto us, just pouring on us on buckets, like vertically. But pretty soon the wind came and it began to blow that rain horizontally into our faces while lifting up whitecaps. And both of us are pulling as hard as we can with each paddle. And I don't know if it was Lisa or me, but one of us first says, beauty check on the right. We look on the right and there's this gorgeous stand of pine trees up on the hill. Beauty check on the left, a few paddles later. And there you see like this bouquet of wildflowers that don't even clash, that seem like they're just there for us. All the way back for all those miles we did this beauty check. And if you ask Lisa or me, we're both convinced it was those beauty checks that gave us the energy to be able to make it all the way back. And so, glory be to God, after we got back, we were able to conceive our first child. And then a couple of years later, we conceived our second child. It would be some years later before we would have our third. But when the second one came, Lisa had to begin her residency in medicine, which at that time, every fourth night, you would work a 36-hour shift in some rotations. And sometimes you would get like 4 hours sleep, sometimes 2 hours sleep, but frequently no sleep at all. And so she would stumble home, and I would think when she came home that, you know, she'll of course want to grab me and like take me back to her room because she missed her husband, but instead she just wanted to go back into the room without her husband and sleep so that she could wake up the next day and go to another 10-hour workday until the fourth day when she did work another 36-hour shift. And while she was doing that, I cut my workload in half so that I could raise the kids and take care of the kids, but also so that I could do my doctoral dissertation at the time, which meant that I had to write that book. So I'd like to say I was the kind of parent when a child would stumble out of the room early from their nap that I would get on the floor and play with them, but instead I would say, how did you break the restraints? Okay, that's a joke too. I didn't really restrain my children. But it was true. When my kids took a nap, that was business time. I had to be writing. I'd get up early, I'd stay up late, they'd take a nap and I'd write. And it did. It did feel like the wind was blowing the rain horizontally into our faces. And it did feel like if we weren't pulling as hard as we could, we were blowing backwards. Maybe we could lose the slide in that. Well, no, let's leave the slide out. But thank goodness Lisa and I remembered that trip and remembered to do our beauty checks. And so if Lisa would come home with some amount of consciousness left and I could get the kids down early, I'd pour out an adult beverage and a snack and we'd say, we're on a date. If somehow we could get a babysitter, you know, or we could get a day off together and take the kids to the zoo, we'd say, hey, we're on vacation. And if we could get the kids to sleep and I could put some food out along with drinks and stuff, we'd say, hey, we're in the most exclusive restaurant in St. Louis. We remembered to do our beauty checks, which brings me to what every resilience study says. Every resilience study says that resilient people make, and these are going to be my words, but they make a defiant, intentional decision to be positive. Again, not that they feel positive, they make a defiant and intentional decision to be positive. The research of Lawrence Gonzalez as he interviewed people who would survive nature accidents, those were his subjects. He discovered that what all these people had in common is they did their beauty checks. One guy said, who was in a life raft hoping to get saved, who was out there for a couple weeks, said, from my seat in hell, I could see heaven. I'd never seen stars like that before. Looking at those stars gave me just enough energy to be able to shiver through another night, to wait another day to be saved. A man that was clawing his way down the Himalayan mountains, who'd lost his team and had a broken leg, said, I woke up in the morning and below me was that valley. I'd never seen beauty like that before. It gave me the hope and it gave me the power to crawl down that mountain a few more hours. Resilient people do their beauty checks. Resilient people are defiantly, intentionally positive, but that's not all they are. They're also realistic. You know, if Lisa and I looked out over that lake and we saw a funnel cloud touching down, we wouldn't have launched ourselves saying, we'll just do our beauty checks. No. Positive people know to be realistic and to assess what's going on. And that's what Lawrence Gonzalez also noticed, that resilient people are willing to do their grief work, to notice that, oh crap, things have turned south. I need to figure out a way to survive this. Whereas people who don't do their grief work, they say, I was just on a walk from a ski resort. Of course I can't be lost. I've just got to work harder, walk faster. No, to do that, to be realistic, to let those feelings wash through you so you can do the next positive thing, which is take a step in the right direction. Let me be clear about something else too. These positive people that are defiantly and intentionally positive, sometimes positivity looks like, although I am suffering an episode of depression, I put my feet on the floor and get out of bed, and I call my psychiatrist to change my medication. Sometimes that's what resilience looks like. Sometimes resilience looks like just it's a decision I make because I don't have the feelings that go with it. I'd like to lead you in an exercise in just a second to operationalize what I'm talking about with positivity. Can we get back to me again, hon? Sorry, you're not going to look at a beautiful lake. You've got to look at me. I want to introduce you to our second exercise by way of a story. Are you okay with hearing another story? This story takes place when I was growing up in the 1970s. I was convinced my mom had a snack food rating scale from 1 to 10. And a 10 would be anything that Hostess makes, you know, ding-dongs, Twinkies, ho-hos, that kind of thing. But down on the opposite end of the scale was anything my dad liked that he would bring from his relatives in the country, you know, like pickled this, pickled that. I mean, stuff that I would love now, but back then it was like I couldn't imagine eating stuff like that. But in the early 1970s, Nabisco came up with a new snack food that blew the roof out of the scale, where you needed to have a scale that took you up to an 11. Because they came up with the wonder and the glory of that toaster pastry, the Pop-Tart. And my mom, when she would go shopping for Pop-Tart, well, for groceries, she would come home with these Pop-Tarts. And do you know how many Pop-Tarts used to come in those boxes? Because I do. There were exactly 6. My mom had 7 kids. So I don't know if you've ever been to a beach and see an unsuspecting 4-year-old throw a Cheeto to a seagull. You know what happens? Like 100 of the seagull's friends all descend like an Alfred Hitchcock movie with their beaks and their claws and that's what would happen when my mom would come home from the grocery store with Pop-Tarts. Before she could get the bag on the table, in would come her seagulls with their beaks and their claws. And before it was all said and done, always, one would get left out and they would be squawking. And my mom wasn't stupid, so she realized, I'm not gonna buy Pop-Tarts anymore to avoid the carnage. And so that's where my story picks up. The story picks up, I might have been around 12, 13, something like that, and I decided I was gonna go on a bike ride. And I lived out in the country, so I took off, and back in the 70s, you remember how you could be raised free range? So I said, yeah, I'll be home later this afternoon. Well, I come back home and I'm hot and I'm thirsty and the family's all gone. I've got the house to myself. So I walk up to the snack food cabinet and I open it after I pour a nice big tall cold glass of milk. And I look and it's empty. Crap. So I take my hand and I reach up and I start feeling. And I feel this thing in a foil pouch. And I grasp it. And I pull it down in my trembling hands and I can scarcely believe it. And I know that Thomas Aquinas came up with 5 proofs for God's existence, but in my trembling little hand, I held the 6th proof. It was a Pop-Tart that the seagulls didn't find. And so I did what any child would do. I took it and I ran back to my room and I locked the door and I sat crisscross-legged on the floor and I broke off pieces of the Pop-Tart and I laid it on my tongue. And I don't even think that I used my teeth, and I tasted the pastry and the sprinkles and that icing. It was practically like communion. And I dissolved one little piece at a time, savoring every bite. I'm convinced we come into the world knowing how to do that. I'm also convinced that somewhere along the line we forget how. Today, this very day, there will be a 7-year-old who came out of their room and said this. The room was full of electronics and toys and books, and they said this when they walked out of their room. I'm bored. Today, this very day, somebody was driving to work when there was a sunrise that was beautiful and they failed to look at it because their mind was on that thing in their head. And on the way home, drove right past a sunset, failed to see it because they were in some argument with somebody in their head. What little children know how to do, just watch a 3-year-old come upon a sidewalk where there's a butterfly's wing that's laying there, they'll always do the same thing. They'll stop whatever they were doing, they'll drop, and they'll savor it. They'll pick it up and they'll flap it, they'll flap themselves, they'll taste it, they'll rub it against themselves. To stop, drop, and savor is our birthright. We know how to do it. We forget along the way. What I'd like to ask you to do for me today is to step into an exercise that I call stop, drop, and savor. It's a way to actualize that most profound of all insights in resilience research, beauty checks. This is a very specific way of doing it that some of you will recognize as an ancient practice in our Catholic tradition. Are you willing to have a go at it? Okay, I'm going to have you close your eyes again. This time I'm going to have you go to a room where there's nothing particularly to look at except there's a door. And the reason I'm introducing you to a door is to wake up your imagination. I want you to see, what's that door made out of? Is it kind of like one of those heavy old-time wood doors? Are there panels to it? Is it like oak or cherry or walnut? Or is it a human-made kind of product, like made out of some metal alloy or particle board? Again, just to wake up your imagination, rub your fingers across it. And by the way, this part isn't the ancient Catholic tradition. This is just me trying to get your imagination working. As you rub your fingers across it, notice the texture of the wood or the substance. Feel the grains of paint or polyurethane. And look at what closes the door and latches it. Is it a knob? Is it a latch? Is there temperature to it? Now, I don't want you to walk through that door just yet, but when I give you the signal, you're going to step through that door to a different time and a different place, an experience that you have been through in your own history. A very specific time where you had a great sense of well-being, of comfort, of perhaps your own power, a sense of warmth. It could be a sense of feeling one with someone. You may find yourself back in time walking up that hill on a hike, only to realize when you get to the top of that hill that you're on a peninsula and that there's water on all sides of you. You let that smell wash over you again. Or you might find yourself on that evening that turned into night where you couldn't pull away because those words just kept coming and getting deeper and more profound. And then those words that you'll never forget got uttered. To be back there in that moment, just in that very moment. Or it may be an accomplishment when you walked across that stage that nobody thought you'd ever walk across, and you picked up that diploma and you gave that smile that some people call a shit-eating grin. So what I want you to do right now is, with your full senses now, to push that door open and to step out into that place, whether it's an indoor place or an outdoor place. Bring your physical senses with you. Bring your internal senses with you. With your eyes, I want you to soak up the scenery. If it's an outdoor place, notice the different shades of color, the greens, the blues, the browns. Any other colors you see? Notice movement. It could come in the form of an insect or a breeze that's blowing through. If it's an indoor place, let your eyes take in what there is to see. If it's indoor or outdoors, is there somebody there with you? See their face, see their activity. See the furnishings in that indoor place. Any artwork on the walls. Is the floor carpeted, or is it wooden, or is it terrazzo, or is it tile? How does light play in the room? Either human-made or natural light. And in this place, let yourself close your eyes so your ears can pick up more acutely what there is to hear. Hear the sounds of your outdoor place. The wind first far off in the pines or the deciduous trees coming closer as it picks up a piece of your hair on the way. The sounds of animal life. The sound of water lapping. The sounds of a desert or a Midwestern woods. If it's an indoor place, is there music? Are there human voices? Is there some equipment making noises? Are there the sounds of a house? And with your eyes closed, take that most primitive of all senses and take a deep breath in through your nose and smell the glory and the wonder of that place. If it's an outdoor place, do you smell earth? Do you smell that Midwestern kind of maple syrup smell in the woods in the fall? Or do you smell the sweet pines of a mountain? Or Mother Earth's smell of the ocean? If it's an indoor place, is there perfume or cologne? That distinctive smell of that room that you know of. And now, feel what your skin communicates. And inside the boundary of your body, I want you especially to pay attention to that feeling that may locate in your chest or your belly or someplace else in your body. What color is that feeling in your body? Is it like a blue color, brown color, green, red, orange, yellow? Is it a sunshiny feeling? What temperature is it? Is it warm? Is it cool? What is that feeling like in the inside of your body? Notice how I'm using poetry to get at it. Yeah, I mean, you might have one of those words like an emotional word. Is there a word attached to what you're feeling in your body right now as you're in that moment? In just a second, you're going to come back. Before you come back, many of you are already doing this. Make sure you perform a smile. If it's not there already naturally, just act like you've got a pencil in your mouth and make a smile spread out. Heck, it's free. A neurotransmitter is bursting into your pleasure center. Why not? Doesn't cost anything and it's legal. Okay. And when you're ready to come back, just open your eyes. Lisa, I don't know that I can give a lot of time because I think an hour and a half is going to be plenty, but could we send people into, especially the people who were all by themselves before? So every room is going to have 3 to 4 people, and I'm not going to give you a whole bunch of time, so kind of get to the story and let people in on it. Particularly take the time to describe the somatic body experience you had that you felt inside your body too, okay? I've got a point here. What we're noticing in psychotherapy in both EMDR work, but just somatic therapy, helping people experience that response in their body has profound resilience effects. So see if you can describe that for your listeners. You ready to go? We have just a few minutes left here, so I'm going to bring this to a conclusion this way. So not everyone was able to tell their stories, I fear, because there wasn't time here at the end. Be sure to tell this story to someone in your life. You know, give a call and say, I went through this exercise and here's what I got in touch with. I want to tell you who in our tradition I was ripping off right there with that exercise. I'm going back to an experience that was taught to me by several really fine spiritual directors. And what was taught to me was the examen. So the examen is looking back retrospectively at where you've seen the grace of God and simply to savor it. Now I know the way it was taught to many of us was it's a chance to go back and see where I screwed up and then kick my own butt around a little bit and have appropriate guilt. Don't get me wrong. Compunction and remorse for screwing up is a good thing. But the way this was taught to me through David Hassel and other Jesuits was that I think embodies Ignatius's exercises better is I look back retrospectively and I notice what grace looks like, feels like, smells like, and tastes like. And if I do that often enough, then sometimes in the moment I'll recognize that the flow of God's grace is here. I don't know how many of you saw Finding Nemo. Marlin the dad is looking for his little son Nemo by getting into the Eastern Australian current that whooshes you toward a destination. Well, that's how the Holy Spirit works in us. If we can get a feel for retrospectively seeing where it was grace, feeling it, becoming familiar with it, then in the moment sometimes we can step into the flow of that grace and whoosh forward with that grace. So this business of stop, drop, and savor is the primary movement of the examen that Ignatius intended. And it's pretty darn good psychology. there's actually some studies done of a gratitude exercise when done for 2 weeks in a row. It lowers depression indices, lowers anxiety indices, raises happiness indices. Check out Marty Seligman did that research. So Ignatius knew a thing or two 500 years ago that we've caught up with. So what I'll invite you to do when you're not on this call is to do something like get out your phone and set an alarm and put in stop, drop, and savor and have it go off the same time every day. When it goes off, close your eyes, look back over the last 24 hours. In fact, why don't you close your eyes now so I can just walk you through it? And see if you can locate any little kindness that was done to you and focus on it, drop everything and just savor it like that Pop-Tart on my tongue. My wife brought me a cup of coffee just the way I like it. Why the heck she do that? Just savor that a minute. Go back and relive that, see it, smell it, taste it, hear it. Why the heck am I hearing more birds in my backyard? Hear that cardinal song. That little grandchild, that niece or nephew wrapped their little hand around my finger. I was on a call and somebody said they loved me and they meant it. I was able to go for a walk and my knees let me get away with it. Just go be in that scene again and savor it. And while you're there, let gratitude kind of bubble up as you feel the goodness of it. And you can voice a little prayer inside. Stop, drop, and savor. This is a very practical way of that intentional, defiant decision to be positive in a given moment. Now, don't get me wrong. Not everything in your life can you be grateful for, but in any given moment, you can find something to savor. You can't savor everything. There's no way you can do it because some stuff just sucks. But in any given moment, even during that suckiness, there's something worth paying attention to. There's a beauty check you can engage. There's something to savor. Developing that as an art form can get us through a pandemic. Can even get us through something like death. Y'all know Mary Alice by chance? Maybe you've heard this story, maybe you haven't. She goes to the emergency room because she's not feeling good in her car. And she's admitted into the hospital and bad goes to worse. And now she's in bed and she's dying and her family's gathered around. At one point, this is a story that was told to me. Mary Alice says, could someone go out to my car because I got a sweater hanging on the driver's seat? If you could reach into that, if you could reach into the pocket of that sweater, you'll find an Emo's coupon. Could you bring that back to me? Because you see that nurse over there? She's been so kind to me. Mary Alice was doing her beauty checks right there on her deathbed. I have a feeling that she lived her life by that poem that said Edna St. Vincent Millay wrote, I shall die, but that's all I'll do for death. I shall die, but that's all I'm going to do for death. Doing her beauty checks, even on her deathbed. Stopping, dropping, and savoring the kindness of a nurse on her deathbed. I'm going to look her up when I get to heaven, because that form of artwork that she knew how to practice, I want to practice too. So, if you want to join me on my Sunday Morning Cafe site, all you got to do is put sundaymorningcafe.com into your search engine, scroll down to the bottom of it, and you can subscribe, and you'll get my videos and my articles that try to combine psychology, spirituality, and family systems with some storytelling. If you don't like it, you can unsubscribe. And if you do like it, you can see it whenever you want to, and you can put your own comments and reflections in there. So I want to thank you. And I want to tell you the humility I feel when I look across this Brady Bunch checkerboard and see so many people that could have given a presentation like this. And I believe me, I understand that your lives speak so much about the very topic I was talking about. So here is where I'll take my leave and just thank you and just tell you resilience isn't just simply those warm-hearted friendships with those 3 or 4 people. It's those people you see across church and don't even know their names, but that smile that you see. And we so miss that. So to see these faces now is such a profound gift. Thank you. And thank you, Catholic Student Center, Gary, Julie, for this opportunity to gather this way again.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks all so much. It was so good seeing everyone. Tom, you did a great job. Lisa, thanks for all of your help.
Thank you, Julie.
Tom, you did a great
Thanks,
job.
Tom.
Thank you, everybody.